Okay,
Please
so this is Ben Soltana, Dr. Ben Soltana. I had all my info on my phone and it decided to fade out. So, I think it's true to say you got your doctorate in applied linguistics at Vic, and you worked as a research officer at Massey and a senior research fellow at Otago. And you're going to talk to us today about silence in tertiary classrooms. So over to you, Ben. Thank you very much. Okay.
Kia ora. So I would like to start with a karakia. Kia tu tura tātou, kia mana ki tātou, kia whaihiranga tātou, kia tu hunu hunu tātou, whānau whānau, haramai te tauki, haumie, huie, tai kie. So today I am going to talk about silence in tertiary education, and what I'll be presenting has already been published in TESOL Quarterly in July 2022. So I just want to give you a snapshot of what I did in this study. But just before that, I would like us to have a moment of silence in solidarity with the brave Iranian women, which is just like about silence again, in alignment with what we do. So a moment of silence. Thank you all. So the agenda for today is about reviewing language learner silence and agency. So we'll have a review of prior work, what silence means, and what other researchers have done in the field. And then we'll go, we talk about the study, the current study, and we also talk about what has been found in the study. Then we'll look at some of the things that we need to consider, particularly as learning advisors when we confront students who appear to be silent in their classrooms. So we'll have a few implications about silence and take-home message. So about silence, well, this study was conducted on Asian international students' silence. We looked at the silence of these students in their university classrooms. So Asian international students' silence in English language courses has often been a critical issue, and particularly Japanese student silence, because the student that I'm looking at is from Japan in this study. So Japanese student silence in particular has been the subject of investigation. Silence has been looked at as a deficiency and a cultural characteristic. We have had essentialized generalizations about silence, but this has been criticized as taken for granted cultural labels and therefore problematic issues. So recently, there has been evidence that silence varies individually, and it is actually a sign of active participation and a form of engagement. So silence in interaction is both inhibitive and facilitative, and it should be contextually understood. Right, so I've looked at silence as a space, and silence has been conceptualized as the space and venue for the potential formation and enactment of international students' identities and agency. So we can draw on silence as a strategy. Students use silence, in fact, as a space to construct their social identities and academic identities. There have been developments on the study of silence. It has been looked at a system, but still a lot of work needs to be done. So in understanding silence and agency in tertiary contexts, we need to look at silence quite differently. Well, currently it is under researched, but I've conducted this study to bridge some of the gaps which already exist in the literature regarding silence. So these notions are not, notions regarding silence, particularly silence of international students within tertiary contexts, are not often explicitly explained or adequately theorized. So I've conducted this study of silence to look at some of these issues. In prior studies, silence, other researchers have shown that there are different meanings behind silence. For example, the silence of disengagement as a result of boredom, inattention, etc., etc. The silence of teacher-centered methods, the silence of non-verbal activities, the silence of confusion, the silence of hypersensitivity to others. And of course, silence has been looked at as having several reasons. There are different reasons behind silence, and each silent behavior has to be looked at differently. So in prior studies, silence has been looked at as having different factors. However, silence has never been looked at as a social space, and how space, contributes to and participates in positioning students, particularly international students, in a silent position. So in the current study, I followed a 19-year-old female student from Japan in 2 semesters of the study. This student was doing a degree in international studies, and she had come to New Zealand to do a few undergraduate courses. I followed the student in her English for academic purposes, and then later on European studies, and also the writing course at the university. She was able to produce simple speech fluently at the time of the study. And I adopted as far as the methodology is concerned, I adopted a longitudinal case study research design to look at this student's silence. I also adopted the theoretical framework of language socialization, which is basically a process through which individuals in a new community learn the practices, norms, social behavior from the more experienced members. And through time, they become more effective members of their communities of practice, if at all. So that's a theoretical framework. And I also looked at the social space. And when we talk about social space, we talk about 3 aspects of physical, mental, and lived. So the physical space, or the perceived space, is the space as seen. So what is tangible around us, the laptop, mobile, desk, whatever which is tangible. Then the other aspect of social space is the conceived space, which is a space of norms, regulations, policies, whatever. So this is the space of designers. In other words, this is the space as thought. And then we have the other space, which is the lived space, or the space of individuals, how you and I as people interact with each other within the space. So this is the space as felt. So I looked at the silence of international students and their language socialization through this spatial framework. So I collected different types of data. I looked at, I collected self-reports by focal student, interviews with the weekly interviews with the focal student for 2 semesters of study, interviews with the teacher, the tutors of the course. I also attended the classes myself. I collected field notes. I video audio recorded her interactions in the class every week. And of course, I use institutional documents. For the analysis of the data, I used discourse analysis, and I had a particular focus on themes and also the content to analyze the data from this student. All right, so talking about space, the study showed that social space positioned this particular student into a silent position. So the physical space itself positioned this student negatively. For example, the arrangement of seats in the classroom and the tables positioned her negatively. In Japan, they did not used to basically sit in a round table together. But in New Zealand, she actually had to sit together with other students around the table, and they had to communicate. She was not used to it. Therefore, the physical space positioned her as a silent student in the classroom. Also, the conceived space and lived space positioned Shelley, the focal student, in a silent position. So the norms of the classroom, the rules of the classroom, she was not used to those norms and rules in New Zealand. And when she came here, she had to familiarize herself with those norms and regulations within the New Zealand context. As a result, she was positioned in a completely silent position. As far as the lived space is concerned, she was also positioned by other students in a silent position. Why? Because the other students in her EAP class, English for Academic Purposes classroom, and also the mainstream European studies classroom, were those who were more powerful linguistically, who had a more powerful linguistic repertoire compared to herself. Therefore, she was positioned in a silent position in the classroom. So the physical space, the conceived space, and lived space positioned Shelley in a silent position. As you can see here, she has only contributed very minimally to the classroom interactions. Let me just use the laser point. So as you can see, Shelley, hi, and then yeah, and then Shelley, yeah, smiles. So her contribution has been quite minimal in the interactions. So what was found in the study? So indeed, social space, which consists of physical, which is a space of tangible things, and the conceived space, which is a space of norms, and the lived space, which is the space of people and interactions, participate in the silence of students in the classroom. So it's not just like this person is inherently silent. So despite being silent due to ecological conditions which were imposed upon her in the classroom and in the social space, she exercised different forms of agency to gain access to her community and make the best of her academic and social situation. She used silence as a space to learn more, become more familiar with the norms, and try to interact with others in a safer environment. Indeed, this space was a space for her to construct and enact her identities. So silence is the outcome of the interplay among 3 forces of perceived, conceived, and lived space. Hence, any interpretation of silence without considering the social space and its constituting elements is not all inclusive and hence incomplete. When we talk about silence, we need to look at the three aspects of space: perceived space, conceived space, and lived space, and see how this contributes to the silent position of international students in the classroom. And this study basically goes well beyond the individual or individualistic approach of looking at silence as having different factors, and it looks at silence as a system, as a social space where different domains of space, the perceived space, conceived space, and lived space, participate in the construction of silence or the silent behavior of the students. So, looking at silence, silence is often seen as a manifestation of deficiency. So this study rejects this, and it rather looks at silence as a space and venue for the potential formation or enactment of international students' agency. So agency is the sociocultural capacity of a person to say no, for example, to what is imposed upon people, for example, in the classroom. So Shelley used her agency to reposition herself in the classroom by being silent. Silence was not an inherent trait for Shelley, for the focal student, given that she was from Japan. It was not an inherent position, but it was imposed upon her in the classroom. So, there has been challenges. The view of silence has been challenged, and the assumption that silence is a negative thing is no longer there, because we understand that people, including Shelley, use silence as a strategy to become familiar with the norms and conditions of the social space. And silence can represent learners' proactive effort to create a safe space, and they first interact with an unfamiliar, when they first interact with an unfamiliar learning environment, just like the environment of New Zealand classrooms. And this is an important step in their transition to the transnational context. And silence can also provide learners with the conditions to listen to and internalize new concepts before they could, interact with their peers and the teachers. And for us as learning advisors, we may need to recognize this process and empathize with learners to better create a supportive and conducive learning environment for the students. All right, thank you very much. I have a few references here, and I'm open to questions. Thank you for listening.
Hi, Ben. Kirsten from Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. I found that really, really interesting. And it made me think about silence in a different way. It also kind of reminded me of how we really promote people who are extrovert in a classroom as opposed to sort of the introverted people as well. And I think it's the same kind of thing as giving people sort of the space to be sort of who they are and taking that time. And so I thought there was a lot to be investigated and thought about there. And I'd really like a copy of your slides if I put my name into the chat, or you be making them available for people.
Yeah, sure. So I'm happy to share my article with you.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Because this is open access.
Mm-hmm.
And I will just put the link in the chat so you can just look at it. Sorry, I was not able to go through the extracts classroom interactions because it's only 15 minutes. So you're more than welcome to follow the link here, and it's open access. You can read the article in full. But yeah, it was a very interesting point that you just mentioned. Although we have people who appear to be silent in the classroom, we also have people who are quite extrovert and talk a lot in the classroom. And that has to be understood again as under what conditions people, you know, what are the conditions that contribute to people's being extrovert in the classroom? What are the things? Will they be extroverts in all classrooms, or there are certain classrooms that they can be introvert in, and in some other classrooms they can't be just extrovert, they turn into introverts? So what are the conditions? I believe the conditions of social space determine people's being extrovert or introvert. They are not they are not built-in extroverts or built-in introverts. So it's all about the social conditions.
We've got someone, Craig actually, who in the chat has asked, would it help at the beginning of a class to tell students it may feel uncomfortable at first sitting at a round table?
Sorry, what was the question again?
Oh, well, he's sort of saying, would it be more helpful for students, particularly international, I guess, to tell them it might feel at the beginning of the class, you know, when you first meet them, that it might feel uncomfortable sitting at a round table at the beginning of their studies?
Indeed, that's a very good suggestion. We need to have a session with international students and let them know that, look, here are the norms of the classroom within a New Zealand context. We expect students to contribute. This might not be, you know, the same case in your home countries, but you might feel uncomfortable at the beginning, but little by little things will change. I think that's a very good suggestion. Absolutely.
So that's from Craig. That's good.
Thank you, Craig. Yeah.
I've just occurred to me, how did you choose this particular student, or did they volunteer, or how did that work?
So I had 6 international students participating in this study. That was an ethnographic study. This student was one of them. The way I recruited the participants was I just went to the EAP classes, English for Academic Purposes classes. I introduced myself, the study, and what, the impositions of the research upon the students. And there were only 6 students who accepted to participate in the study. I was also a teacher in the same school at the time of study or prior to that. So I was teaching in the EAP program. And so the students already knew me. And this also allowed me to be able to recruit those students. That was an advantage.
Okay, has anybody else got some things they'd like to ask? Feel free to join in the discussion.
I just thought it was interesting that the idea of not necessarily being introvert or extrovert matters, whether you're necessarily going to contribute, because I think it's quite thought-provoking, because I think people speak in different circumstances. You could be a party extrovert, but an academic silent person, Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It all depends on the conditions. We cannot essentialize people as being introverts or extroverts. There are situations I can actually, contribute a lot because I might have content knowledge, or I might have, I might be comfortable with the people around me or the situation or other conditions. But if they change the situation, they take me somewhere else, I might just, choose to be silent. So this idea of being introvert and extrovert is not something fixed. It changes from a situation to another.
Kia ora, Ben. Ko tae tāmri taku ingo. I'm at Unitec. I just, sorry, I missed part of your kōrero. We had the staff awards going on outside, and so I've had to close all the doors. Do you think culture contributed at all to her silence, given she's Japanese?
Yeah, I had a discussion at the start of this, and Kubota has a very good paper on this. And this has been critiqued that, given that she is from Japan, we assume that this is a cultural characteristic. And Kubota has written a paper in 1999 saying that this is an essentialized overgeneralization, and this is hence problematic. So I will be happy to share Kubuta's paper with you, who has rejected this idea and has mentioned that, look, we have to look at individuals' silence in different situations differently. So each silent behavior has to be analyzed in its own right.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about our Pacific international students now in the Tongan culture. They're silent. They don't ask questions.
So let me share you. That's a very good question. One of my participants was from Tonga.
Yep.
And he was basically older than the other people. So he was the most talkative person in the classroom.
Yeah.
When I asked him, why do you speak so much in the class? He said, well, I'm older than the others. I look at myself as chief in the classroom. I have to support my people. So I look at the other peers as my people.
That's good.
So
I think that's great.
Yeah.
We have what we find, or have found, and what we do know is that with our younger generation, they're taught up to respect and not look up or speak up, and they look down, and so that's sometimes communicated as disrespectful, but it's not. It's a sign of respect. So I guess age and all that has something to do with it as well. But thank you for your kōrero. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. Cheers.
Okay, so we've got 2 more minutes. So if anybody else has got a comment or a question that they'd like to state or ask, feel free, because Ben won't be here all the time. But
I just wondered, sorry, I'm too long. Just wondered whether there were any gender effects that you identified for students.
Yeah.
Any gender effects amongst this?
Their silent behaviour or otherwise.
All right. So I had 2 female students from Japan, 1 female, 1 male student from China, and 1 from Vietnam, female from Vietnam, and 1 male from Tonga. Well, there were all sorts of reasons behind silence, but the students, the international students in this study, did not talk about gender being a problem within the EAP classrooms. They did not talk about it, not that it didn't exist. They didn't talk about it. I didn't have data saying that because I am a female, I'm not able to talk. But they did talk about the fact that I'm not familiar with European studies course. I don't know what has happened in the European history, therefore I can't contribute. I did have data about, look, I have to spend around 8 hours every day checking the vocabulary items in the European studies text to be able to understand the material. Yeah, and I also did have data about the same student in the Spanish class who who did not participate a lot, but was not very much worried either, because Spanish for New Zealanders was also a problem. They spoke Spanish as an additional language. So that gender thing did not appear to be a theme in my study, but I cannot reject that has not been a problem.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Ben. I found that really, really interesting, and I'll definitely be looking at your paper, I think. So thanks very much for coming here and, well, coming online and sharing your research with us. It's really very, very good and interesting. Okay.
Thank you, Marvin.
No
All right,
worries.
all the very best. Cheers.
You too. Yeah.